ISIS is honoring President Obama. He is the founder of ISIS. He's the founder of ISIS.
He said President Obama is the founder of ISIS. He just refounded ISIS because they got 30,000 men there, and they're already striking back.
Brian, I have to respectfully and vehemently disagree with you. The idea that the president has had anything to do with helping ISIS reemerge is absolutely outrageous.
Wow. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders in a tense exchange with Fox and Friends host Brian Kilmeade, who said that President Trump refounded ISIS with his decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria. John Heilman, Susan Del Percio, and Casey Hunt are back with us. And John Heilman, it's interesting to watch the president's relationship with conservative media seemingly devolve in some ways in light of the events of the past 48 hours.
Sure, Mika. It's been fascinating, especially on Fox and Friends, one of the morning shows the president's known to watch with some interest. They, a couple days ago, you saw them essentially saying that he had lost the battle over the wall to Nancy Pelosi. They came right out and said it. They said, oh, my God, Donald Trump just capitulated. Nancy Pelosi, big win. They had the ability to see the nose on their face, and they're now seeing it again in the context of this discussion with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Look, I find it fascinating. The president, obviously, the things he's doing with respect to the shutdown seem to be driven very much by conservative media. He seems to be, talking to Rush Limbaugh, taking advice from Ann Coulter and Laura Ingraham and others. At the same time, there seems to be, in some quarters at least of conservative media, a recognition that the jig is up for the president, and a greater willingness than we've heard in a long time for them to speak the truth about the ways in which, again, not to beat a dead horse or overuse the metaphor, wheels, wagons, not necessarily conjoined any longer.
Yeah, and it seems like, Mika, that the conservative news media went from being a cheerleader of Donald Trump to trying to dictate the policy of Donald Trump. And now we face something that the president really better realize. Only he is responsible for the actions he takes. Fox News is not going to step up and take responsibility if we have a shutdown. This all falls on the president. And, I understand that he likes favorable reviews, as he calls it, but it's time to turn off the TV. He just has to stop listening because he is so easily guided by these folks on television.
Well, joining us now, we have member of the Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on Immigration and Border Security, vice-ranking member of the Budget Committee, Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington. And Congresswoman, what did we learn out of the hearing with Secretary Nielsen beyond the words, "We want wall"? What are your takeaways from the hearing, and how do you feel about them?
Mika, it was a tough hearing to sit through, and I said that when it came to my turn to question Secretary Nielsen. And the reason it was so difficult is she told untruth after untruth. She literally, the facts did not comport with the truth. And so, for example, she continued to insist, and she was questioned by many members, that there was no family separation policy. I pointed out to her that she had received 4 Pinocchios for that statement from fact checkers. She insisted that only 10% of asylum seekers were able to get into the country, which totally misses the fact that it all depends on whether or not you have an attorney. And so this went on, and there was a denigrating of immigrants coming into the country, no recognition for, the role that the Trump administration has played in actually building up the numbers on the Mexico side. And I was in Tijuana 2 weeks ago. I spoke with these asylum seekers. Mika, a 16-year-old boy shot in both knees by gangs in Honduras. These are the people that we're talking about. So I think the takeaway was that she has a lot of answering to do. I know that she's going to come back before us. This was the first time we've had the secretary. Kelly didn't come before us when he was secretary, and she has not come until now. So we're going to have her back when Democrats have the gavel. I think it'll be a different kind of hearing.
All right, Casey Hunt.
Congresswoman, good to see you. Another moment from that hearing that stuck out to me was she was asked if she knew how many people had passed away in the custody of CBP or of ICE. What was that moment like, and what do you want to hear from her if you do bring her back in front of your committee on that subject?
Hi, Casey. Great to see you. Yes, she was asked, and she could not answer the question. And that was David Cicilline, my colleague David Cicilline, who really pushed on that. When it got to my turn, I told her, I had to tell her how many people had died. 81 individuals have died in DHS custody since 2010. And just in the short time that she's been secretary, 12 individuals have died. So I think this lack of, sort of attention to the fact that the U.S. government has custody of these individuals and is responsible for them, the lack of medical care, the lack of attention to making sure that these individuals are treated, given water, given food, given medical care. It was really stunning. And so I think when she comes back before Democrats, she will actually have to give us the very specific things that the agency is doing. And I think we're going to put in minimum standards before we release additional funds to these private detention facilities that house about 3/4 of all of these immigrants. Just imagine $4 billion in profit from these private detention facilities that DHS uses.
Congresswoman Hayes, John Heilman here. You have some great committee assignments, some of which are about to get a lot more interesting than they have even been over the course of the last couple of years. The one I'm thinking of right now is the Judiciary Committee, where you are going to be at the center of a lot of action once we get to January. Talk to us a little bit about what you think about the decision of Acting Attorney General Whitaker to ignore the advice of the Ethics Council in the Justice Department about recusal, and what you on the committee intend to do about it when you take power.
Very distressing. This is actual advice from ethics to say you have a conflict of interest, you need to recuse yourself. He is choosing not to do that. And so we have already said, soon-to-be Chairman Nadler on our side has said that we will have him in to go through this. But, I think we have to focus some attention here on Republicans who have continued to refuse to protect the special counsel's investigation. Time and time again, they've refused to do that. And I have to say, I'm just really disappointed that Republicans are not standing up and saying, we need to make sure that we are protecting this investigation. Remember when Robert Mueller was appointed, everybody came out, Republicans included, and said what an upstanding guy he was. He was a Republican. He could be counted on. And now we're in this situation where they really have been attacking him on every level. And so this is a huge concern for us. We will pass a special counsel protection bill, I'm sure of it, when Democrats take the gavel. But it will be up to Republicans in the Senate to start to speak out. When Mitch McConnell says he's disappointed in this or that, that's not enough. They actually need to do things to protect our Constitution. That should not be partisan.
I'm really confused as to why they weren't able to do that. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, thank you so much for being on this morning. And coming up, the president is tweeting feverishly, blaming Democrats if the government shuts down tonight, as if everyone forgets what he said in the Oval Office last week. And as we continue to discuss the impact of Defense Secretary James Mattis's resignation, we are reminded of that bizarre cabinet meeting last year where the president was lavished with praise. As other members talked about the honor and privilege of serving Donald Trump, here's what Mattis said.
Mr. President, it's an honor to represent the men and women of the Department of Defense. And we are grateful for the sacrifices our people are making in order to strengthen our military, so our diplomats always negotiate from a position of strength. Thank you.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.